This is Joe Green, and I want to share a commentary with you based on current affairs. So, some of you probably are familiar with these names I'm going to read. Some of you may not be. Sexy Red, Sukihana, Glorilla, Ice Spice, Megan the Stallion, and some of these others that you've heard of. Cardi B, and there's many other artists. But these are like the new top artists out there, the most trending, probably most popular hip hop artists that we see, and they're all female. And the interesting thing about it is that all of them are super over sexualized in their lyrics and how they carry themselves. Many of them are former strippers that they admit to being strippers, but just super sexy. As a matter of fact, there was a Sexy Red, and I'm not suggesting you go listen to them, only if you can your sensibilities can stand it. So Sexy Red is a newer hip hop artist, and she has a song. The reason I came across her is because someone was doing a commentary on how terrible these lyrics are. So she has a song called Pound Town, and I wouldn't even, for those of you who probably know, the word Pound Town is making a reference to sexual activity. And I had printed out the lyrics. I was going to share some of them, but once I read through them, I was like, nah, I couldn't even start to share them. It's just so much profanity and so much sexually explicit language. There's another rapper who is similar to her, and she's also did a couple of songs with Sexy Red, and her name is Sukihana, and she has a song called Eating. So Pound Town, of course, is making a reference to sexual activity. Eating is also making reference to sexual activity where, and I'm only saying this not for any type of shock value or anything like that, but just to put things in perspective as far as how far these things have gone downhill. Eating is referring to her having or oral sex in the anus or rectum, however you want to say it. But anyway, these songs are extremely graphic. The videos are very sexual, look like softcore pornography. And it's just really, and these are some of the more popular songs and popular rappers in our culture. And I think it's so important for us to discuss it and even to be aware of it. I'm a grandfather. I have two granddaughters and a grandson. And some of you out there may be parents or grandparents, or you might even be young people that are getting caught up in this stuff. I have a young lady I talked to not long ago, and she was talking about how Cardi B was like one of her idols. And for those of you who don't know Cardi B is a former stripper, very sexually explicit language that she uses in her lyrics, and sexual, very sexual in her videos as well. Um, but here's what I always like to get to. The fact of the matter is, this stuff is not just happening by happenstance. It's not just that these things are occurring. There's a clear agenda that is being perpetrated. And as you have watched my other videos, and please, as before I go any further, if you can please like, share, and subscribe to videos. If you find anything beneficial, please share with other people. I think they're good discussions to have and important discussions to have. These things are not happening by chance. I've talked about this in the past. Back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, you had this ideology. We call it Marxism. Marxism, which also leads into, I mean, Marxism also is similar to when you talk about governmental economic systems, socialism, communism, and those type of things. And so Karl Marx is the person who basically has been touted with being the founder of this ideology, which is why it's called Marxism. And Karl Marx was absolutely anti-Christ and anti-God. So when you see these things happening, I want you not to be naive just to think that these are people just expressing themselves. And what I mean by that is that these artists that we're talking about are very much getting supported and promoted. They're gaining a lot of wealth because of promoting this. And so you do have rappers. I'm 56 years old, and so back in the 70s when rap really first hit the scene, I was a huge rap fan and had been a rap fan for many years. And because I love the creativity, the expression, the beat, all that other stuff. But it's very clear in these days, in these last couple of decades, that rap has been weaponized, and it's weaponized to promote certain type of concepts and ideologies that are clearly not in the best interest of society, but also they're anti-God or anti-Christ. So Karl Marx said his life goal was to destroy capitalism and to dethrone God. And so Marxism at its core is anti-God, anti-Christ. It also is very deceptive because it is presented in a way that makes it seem as though they really sincerely want to help. But that's not what happens. It's just a shift of power from one power structure to the other. And when Marxism shifts the power to those who are promoting their ideology, it's actually worse because of there is no middle class. There is no the average person or families now become under the control of a different type of system that does not give opportunity for accumulation of wealth or anything like that, or even self-determination, which is really what it should be about. Because you might not care about pursuing wealth, you may be satisfied and you know, you might be okay with just living a regular life, not of extravagance or anything, or not gaining a whole bunch of wealth, but it is your choice to make. You should be self-determined. You should be able to decide whether I want to chase after huge amounts of wealth or whether I'm just going to be complacent in however I am. You know, part of our ministry, we do homeless ministry, and over the years, it's been over 15 years that I've been doing this kind of stuff, this kind of work, probably close to 20 years. And I've met a lot of homeless people that want to be homeless. They don't want to worry about paying bills or paying rent or mortgage. They don't want to worry about being obligated to be at a certain place at a certain time. And that's their choice. You know, you should be self-determined and want to, the ability to make the choices for your life and for your family. And no one should be able to dictate or control to you how you live your life. But anyway, we talk about Marxism as being anti-God, anti-Christ. I'm going to talk about some of the concepts and ideas behind it. And what happens is, just like anything that is anti-God and anti-Christ, many times it's packaged as it is something to benefit you or something that's going to give you something positive, you know. And so when we see these young ladies and this culture that is becoming over sexualized, and also materialism is huge. So not only are these women being over sexualized, but they're also making a lot of money by basically almost like prostituting themselves to a certain degree. Um, and so what is it doing? It's sending the signal that this over sexualization is good for you, that it's liberating or giving you freedom, and it also is very is very profitable for you to act like that. That's the impression that they give. But it really, at the end of the day, only leaves brokenness and destruction in its wake. So let's talk a little bit more about this. So this whole idea, and there's another artist named Doja Cat who, if you've seen her lately, she's become very satanic. Her videos are very satanic, and it is clear that she is also pushing an anti-God, anti Christ agenda. And she even has an album, and she now calls herself Scarlet. So let me tell you real quick, a lot of these people are under demonic influences in order for them to be elevated or elevate to the highest of certain industries. And so if you're familiar with the biblical story, Satan shows Jesus when Jesus was being tempted in the wilderness, all the kingdoms of the world. And he says, they all belong to me. I'll give them to you if you bow down and worship me. And so it's this idea of fame and fortune or being successful that comes from Satan, but it comes at a price. And so many of these artists have literally signed their soul over, sold their soul to the devil for fame and fortune and wealth and riches. And so when many times when they do that, when they are elevated, they actually it's a demon. Basically, it's a demonic spirit, but they call them alter egos. And if you know anything about MK Ultra or different things like that, they traumatize you and put you through certain types of trauma in order to splinter your personality or make you more susceptible to demonic influences. And so, for instance, and I know a lot of people love her, Beyonce. Beyonce has an alter ego called Sasha Fierce, and she's even admitted that Sasha Fierce is a different person when she gets on stage, that this spirit takes over and it allows her to dance and sing at a level that she couldn't do it on her own. This is her words, not mine. Nicki Minaj had one called Roman, who was another alter ego that took her over. So this rapper Doja Cat has one, and hers is called Scarlet. So she calls herself Scarlet. She has done things like shaved her head off. She's put herself in red paint that looks like blood, and I don't know if it's blood or not, but it gives you the impression that it is. And so anyway, scarlet, this idea of scarlet and or the scarlet woman. Now, there was a gentleman who, by the name of Aleister Crowley, and I'm going to explain this this thing about scarlet. Aleister Crowley was an occultist, and he was considered the wickedest man in the world. He was around in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and he had a cult called Thelema. He wrote a book called the Book of the Law, which was the Book of Thelema. And the core of his book was called Do What Thou Wilt is the Whole of the Law. Now, what does that mean? What that means is that is anti-God, anti-Christ, that says that you can do whatever you want to do, and that's how you should live your life. And it is a direct shot at Genesis chapter 3, when Satan, Lucifer the devil, tricked Adam and Eve into eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And he said to them that when you eat from this fruit, you will be like God, and you will be able to determine what's right and what's wrong, right? So this whole idea of do whatever you will, or the law of Thelema, which is Greek for will, it means you do whatever you want to do. And so his partner was a lady by the name of Hersig, Leah Hersig. Leah Hersig was appointed Scarlet Woman by Aleister Crowley, who was the founder of this religion called Thelema. And why is this significant? This is significant because this is making a reference to what the Book of Revelations talks about, the woman dressed in scarlet and purple, and we'll get to that. But I want to share a little bit more about Aleister Crowley and where all this comes from. The concept of the whore and the beast of Babylon was taken directly from the Book of Revelation. Like I said, Aleister Crowley, for his cult of Thelema, he claimed to identify with the beast, even from an early stage, obviously not having truly read the passages in the Bible. This is what this commentary says. But anyway, he identifies himself as the beast. And you know that the Bible refers to the devil, Satan, and the Antichrist. It makes a reference to that being attached to the beast, the concept of the beast. In Thelema, this cult, Babylon is a spiritual gateway for rebirth after passing through chaos into the enlightenment of their cult, with heavy sexual connotations. So they had a thing called sex magic, which is what they would do, sexual rituals and different things like that. And it would not only channel occult energy, but also connect them to demonic energy as well. Babylon is one of the otherworldly patrons for the occultist pantheon. She was brought forth from another dimension by her followers, intent on turning all humans into mindless slaves. And she may have other ideas of the gods. Now, the appearance of the whore of Babylon, the scarlet woman, as the Bible, and I use that word whore, that's what the Bible calls it, the harlot or the whore. And her appearance, and this is interesting, the appearance, a mostly naked, sexualized woman with lots of makeup, carries a jeweled cup, riding atop a red chimeric beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. That's how it's described. And so when you see this imagery in some of these videos, I don't believe that these young women may or may not necessarily understand the demonic or occultic symbolism of what they're doing. They probably, most of them have handlers that just choreograph things. They set up the things or whatever. But behind the scenes, you have to realize that this is occultic stuff. This is demonic things that are occurring, and there's a purpose behind it. So when we talked about Marxism, Karl Marx had and some of the people that adhered to the ideology of Marxism, which was really meant to try to take over the world and control the masses by a select few amount of people, that believed that they were enlightened, or that they had some secret knowledge that made them like gods, right? That's the idea, the ideology behind what we're talking about here. And so in order for them to take over, they have to, in the olden days, before the population explosion that occurred because of the Industrial Revolution and things like that, these monarchs, these rulers were able to control the masses because it wasn't a huge amount of people. But the more that the Earth's population explodes, which is why you got to be careful when when you hear people talk about population control, even with global warming, the core of global warming, of the ideology behind the global warming initiative, is that there's too many human beings on the earth. So all these things are tied into that same ideology, that at its core goes back to Satan and his belief system, right? Because God told human beings to be fruitful and multiply and spread out over the face of the earth, which the ideology behind global warming and these other things that I'm going to explain to you is just the opposite. So they have people huddled around. You know, a lot of times they tell you the earth is overpopulated. It's overpopulated if you stood in downtown Manhattan or downtown Tokyo. I think Tokyo has millions of people, 20 million people in it or something like that, or even in Kenya, some of these large nations. Yeah, they have millions of people that live in a small space, but the only thing you would have to do is go a couple of minutes outside of those metropolitan areas, and you would see places that have no people and they have nothing but land and open spaces, right? So when they tell you that the earth is populated, it is overpopulated if you go right in the middle of a metropolitan area. But you know, New York, if you drove upstate New York, you could drive for miles and miles and not see a person, only trees and grass and forests and those type of things. So anyway, so this ideology behind that with population control, they wanted to control the masses, right? But it's difficult. So they came up with this idea of a revolution without bloodshed and or without tears. So what did they these Marxists, these people that go to these think tanks, these people that believe that they're enlightened because of the secret knowledge that they possess and that they have the right to run the world, um, they recognize that in order for them to control the masses, they can't just come with military might because there's too many people, and it would be so terrible if that happened. So what did they do? They came up with a strategy to create people that will not only be enslaved mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, but that they will embrace their enslavement. And so what did they do? They recognized that the biggest detriment or biggest hindrance for this Marxist ideology, these global elite people, the biggest pushback is a thing called the Judeo-Western culture, right? Judeo-Christian Western culture, because of the principles of the Judeo-Christian Western culture, hindered them from being able to uh, create this revolution without tears or bloodshed, right? Because when you have like say for instance the nuclear family, which is key, when you have a strong nuclear family, it creates strong individuals, right? When you have people that are believe in God, then it's hard to control them because you think about the same ideology that occurred during the Roman Empire, right? So the Roman Empire tried to destroy Christianity and keep it from taking over because in the Roman Empire, and I'm rambling a little bit, but I'm going to bring it back full circle. So in the Roman Empire, just like in ancient Egypt, the ruler was considered a god. And so Caesar was considered a god and was worshiped. And that's why the story with Jesus, when they said, should we pay taxes? And he took a coin out that had Caesar's likeness on it, because Caesar would have been worshipped in the Roman Empire, just like Pharaoh was worshipped in the Egyptian Empire. So, but what happened was when Christianity took over, not only would they refuse to worship Caesar or Pharaoh, but they didn't fear death, and so you couldn't even threaten them with "I'm going to kill you," because the Apostle Paul and the other disciples slash apostles, all of them willingly allowed themselves to be martyred because of their faith. That's why Paul says to be absent in the body is to be present with the Lord. So let's get back to this whole idea of you know, this revolution without bloodshed. And so what they did was they looked at the Judeo-Christian Western culture, and they created and you hear me talk about this a lot in my videos, what's called critical theory. So critical theory targets those pillars or institutions of the Judeo-Christian Western culture and looks to tear it down. And so, you know, for instance, um, they fight against what's called heteronormative thinking. So heteronormative thinking is the idea that has been accepted for centuries, that acceptable relationships are really between an adult male and an adult female, right? So no other culture or civilization openly embraced it or legalized same-sex unions. It was always believe, because of science and spiritually, that male and female are to come together, right? As a matter of fact, the Bible says that's the image of God, male and female, he made them. And so they came in and they now have tried to destroy the idea of heteronormative thinking, whereas You no longer, as a society, we no longer say the only acceptable relationships are to an adult male and an adult female, right? So that's one of the ways. Um, the feminist movement is called the second wave feminist movement, and Gloria Steinem and some of these other people promoted the idea that the patriarchy was evil. That's why you hear terms like toxic masculinity, because toxic masculinity says that the patriarchy, which is what most people believe, that the husband is the head of the household, right? And so, which is a biblical concept, that the husband is the head of the household, that's evil, and that's why women are oppressed because of the patriarchy, right? So they call it toxic masculinity. They are emasculating our men, making them more effeminized and masculinating, making women more masculine, right? Intentionally. So when we talk about these rappers that we're talking about, they're very aggressive. They're very, they have a lot of masculine energy. And it's really intentional because it's meant to destroy the Judeo-Christian Western way of thinking. Race is a big one that they're using to continue to have us fighting each other. And so they over exaggerate any situation that has a black person and a white person, and they ignore the fact that these wicked things happen with people of the same race. And so if you look in the black community, black people, unfortunately, are number one as far as when it comes to homicides, not only the perpetrators, but the victims. So most black people are killed by a large margin by most violence is occurred by other black people, but they don't focus on that. They only focus on the small amount of times where it's a white person perpetrating violence towards a black person, right? Especially if it's a police officer. So they focus on that, but they don't focus on all the other times that it happens and it's not a black and white person. And that's intentional because it's to fan the flames, to keep you in a sense, an agitated sense that this is a terrible thing, right? So the one thing that we are looking at when we're talking about these female rappers and how the culture has become is a concept known as hedonism. Hedonism is um, one of the strategies or agendas that's being pushed by these global elite. And I'll tell you what hedonism is. The hedonism comes from the ancient Greek word for pleasure. Psychological or motivational hedonism claims that only pleasure or pain motivates us. Ethical or evaluative hedonism claims that only pleasure has worth or value, and only pain or displeasure has devalue or the opposite worth. That's the general definition of what hedonism is. Introduction to Principles of Morals of Legislation. This author, Jeremy Bentham, wrote, nature has placed mankind under the governance of two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure. It is for them alone to point out what we ought to do, as well as to determine what we shall do. And so the concept behind hedonism is that you should live your life based on pursuing pleasure, right? And likewise, you would not do things that would cause you pain, right? And that, now naturally, human beings will gravitate towards easier, right? It's what is it? The least resistance, taking the path of least resistance. So that's a basic thing, but that's not the core of who you are. And many of us, you think about some of the goals that you pursue that cause you pain. If you are a world-class athlete, you put yourself through a lot of pain to get to the other side of the pain so that you could be successful, right? If you lift weights and you want to build muscle, you go through pain and you get used to going through pain in order to build muscle. And so this idea that you should only gravitate towards pleasure and avoid pain, although it's natural, it is not the core of who we are as human beings, right? Even war, you think about war, people have fought for freedom. And so this idea of hedonism that tries to promote the idea that you should always just pursue pleasure, and what it will do ultimately, it would cause people in the long run not to resist the powers that be that look to control things, right? And so even if you look at our modern culture, what do? They continually give you things to make your life easier, and many people even will surrender things and give up part of your humanity in order to make your life easier, right? So how many of us, instead of getting out and exercising, will sit on the couch and watch our 1,500 channels we have on our television, right? And or nowadays you have instead of, we used to, many people back in the days used to cook, and people still cook. I'm not saying that they don't, But think about how now it's easier for us, not only for fast food, we want it quickly, but now you have DoorDash. You say, I don't even want to I don't want to cook. I don't want to even leave my house to go get some and wait and sit down at a restaurant. I need it to come to my door right away. Right. So these are things that make your life easier. But at what are you giving up? You have to be careful to think about, what is it that I'm giving up as part of my humanity, that when I just seek after pleasure. Uh, Other contributors to debate about hedonism include Plato, Aristotle, Epicurus, Aquinas, Butler, Hume, and many more people. So Nietzsche, there's a lot of people that have discussed this over the years, but I'm going to talk to you about it and give you the biblical perspective of it. But what happens is they are promoting the idea that we should live your life, or you should live your life, just based on chasing after pleasure. And so there's this overindulgence of just the pleasures of this world, right? These rappers, you look at these rap videos, not only is it over sexualization and just tell you can be as sexual as you want to, and they brag about being super sexual and profane even, but in the videos, everything's material. So they talk about how I spent 50,000 on a gold chain, or I have a Maybach Benz or a Lamborghini or something like that. And what it does is promote this idea of hedonism, that you should just live your life. And there's even a couple of sayings that some of the young people have. You only live once, right? YOLO. Live hard and die young, right? And all these type of things. It gives you the idea that your life should be just about pursuing pleasure, and to the excess, right? Even to the excess. Um, but let's look at a little bit more of this. When we talk about critical theory and we talk about these ideologies that are being promoted, and I want you to look this up for yourself. Don't just take my word for it. All this stuff is well documented. It's not as though I'm just making this up just out of blue. These are documented. They have these think tanks, they call them. And you've heard me make reference, if you've been following me, about the Frankfurt School in Germany or the Tavistock Institute. These are think tanks where these people that have this globalist ideology come together and they begin to lay out strategies on how they can achieve their goals, right? They call it the long march forward. And so they plan these things slowly over time. Some of the things that happened in the 60s, there was a lot of these things that occurred in the 60s, whether it's the second wave feminist movement, now they have third and fourth wave feminist movement, whether it's the sexual revolution, whether it was the drug culture. So the hippie movement was part of this, that they promote this idea, you just go out and just live your life. You can get high and just live out in the field and have sex with whoever you want to. These things were promoted as forms of hedonism in order to weaken the Judeo-Christian Western culture. Critical theory, the initial proposal of the Frankfurt School can simply be summarized by highlighting the idea that philosophy without empirical scientific research is empty, just as science without philosophy is blind. Max Horkheimer, that's somebody you should probably look up if you get the opportunity. Horkheimer is spelled Horkheimer, became the director of the Institute of Social Research at the University of Frankfurt and recruited many of those who came to be known collectively as the Frankfurt School. He stressed that at the time the Frankfurt School was established, none of the dominant philosophical schools contained an adequate social philosophy. He implied that social philosophies encompass the entire material and spiritual culture of humanity, in opposition to the separation between social theory, science, and philosophy, which was dominant at the time and still today. Now, what am I saying? Let me sum this up for you. And so basically, we had the study of psychology that occurred mainly in Germany, by the same group of people, and they started to address this whole idea of what's called groupthink, and I've talked about it in my last video that I did. So please go back and look at that. Groupthink, which is that most people want to be in compliance with the rest of their colleagues, right? And so they start to look at, how can we control groupthink? How can we get people to do what we want to get them to do? If you think about modern psychology, which the study of really hit big in Germany. You think about these think tanks that wants to use the concept of groupthink, and you think about during the Nazis, they had this thing that they created called propaganda, and propaganda is simply the tool in order how to promote things that get people to agree on things, right? And so they intentionally promote this stuff. That's why they control the media. They control popular opinion. You have this whole idea of what's called Well, now they have cancel culture, but they also had a thing called politically correct. And so if you said something that goes against the agenda, then you get canceled. They say that's not correct. It's politically incorrect. You can't say that. You can't do those type of things. All these things are tools that are being used in order to promote the larger agenda. And so when you think about these things, and I want you to be mindful and aware of these things, so when you start to see them, then you will be informed and you won't fall victim to it. I won't read all through about critical theory, but one of the things that I talked about in the previous video is you had this guy named Antonio Gramsci that wrote the prison notebooks, and he was also a person with this globalist ideology, Marxist, and he talked about cultural Marxism and social engineering. And so what that means is, again, the whole thing with critical theory is how do you attack these pillars, institutions of the Judeo-Christian Western culture in a way that not only weakens those institutions, but also weakens the people. And then they will accept things. They will be more acceptable to different things. You think about it, and it's been well known, like when we're talking about these female rappers, right? It was well known that when you saw back in the days a young lady who was very promiscuous, she was a stripper or a sex worker or whatever, normally everyone would say she must have daddy issues. She must have had a bad relationship with her daddy. And why is that important? That's important because just like psychologists say that the first man that a young lady falls in love with, psychologically speaking, is her father, right? And so the relationship between the daughter and father is very significant because when that relationship is fractured, then a lot of times it could cause a young lady to be promiscuous or be on drugs or whatever the case may be, because there's a void that was left that was supposed to be filled by her dad and by her family that's not there anymore. Because when a young lady comes from a strong family, a strong nuclear family, then it helps to build self-confidence and self-worth to the place where she won't devalue. She's less likely to devalue herself because of the fact that she has this strong foundation that was built right through her nuclear family. And so when you take that away, when you destroy the family, the nuclear family, redefine the family, and do all these type of things that are happening, because a natural result of the sexual revolution or sexual promiscuity is children out of wedlock, right? And so now, and I want to address real quick, the CDC recently came out with a study that said that Black fathers are more involved in their children's life than other people groups, right? That's what the study said. But what the study failed to look at was nuclear families. So although Black fathers may be more connected to or more involved in their children's life, right, which they said the statistics speak to this, but yet by the same token, the Black family has the highest unwed pregnancy rate, which means the nuclear family is destroyed. So even when you have fathers involved, it's the nuclear family that is really the key foundation that helps to build us up as individuals. And it doesn't mean that you are doomed to living a certain way because you have a broken family unit. It just means that there's a higher probability, and you can go down through all the statistics, whether it's educational performance, higher incarceration rates, higher drug use, and all this other stuff. All is tied into broken nuclear family structures. um, and so if you think about, even in the Black community, it wasn't that they necessarily just wanted the Black fathers out of the household when they created the war on poverty, but more importantly, it destroyed the nuclear family, because when they set up the war on poverty through the welfare system, if there's a single mother who's on welfare, the father can't be in the household. So even if the father's involved, it still destroyed the nuclear family because he couldn't live in the same household as his family legally. So anyway, it's another topic for another day. So anyway, I'm not going to go through all this stuff, but when you get a chance to look at some of the people I'm mentioning, Gramsci with us, they call it social. I mean, cultural Marxism, right? To destroy some of the norms of the Judeo-Christian Western culture, and these type of things. This is what we're looking at right now. Now, we talked about hedonism. We talked about uh, what the Bible says about this imagery of the harlot or the scarlet woman, right? Which is what this is what you're seeing when you see these new rappers coming up. This whole idea of the scarlet woman. When you say a scarlet woman, That means a woman who is very sexually promiscuous, you know, and very sexual. So not only are they sexual, but they also imply sexual promiscuity, like they just have sex with multiple people. Um, One other concept I want to talk about, and then we're going to get to what the scripture actually says about it. So there's this other thing that occurs. So we talked about it from a control part. We talked about it from that perspective, but now I want to talk about it from biology. There's this hormone called oxytocin. Oxytocin is a chemical hormone that is in the human body and is connected with sex. So oxytocin Oxytocin is a chemical in the brain that has important roles in human behavior, such as sexual arousal, recognition, trust, romantic attachment, and parent-infant bonding. Now, this is from the Cleveland Clinic that I got this from. When you talk about oxytocin, so what happens is when you are sexually aroused or when you're intimate with someone, and some studies said it even starts with hugging people, right? So when you're aroused, sexually aroused, or intimate with someone, there's a chemical called oxytocin that's released. And what it's supposed to do is it's help to bonding. It's for bonding purposes. And so you think about what the Bible says, and I know a lot of people haven't done it this way. I'm just telling you, God's intention, his plan, his design is the one that works best when we follow it, right? So there's chemicals in your brain so that the first time you're intimate with someone, these chemicals get released and it actually helps to bond the relationship, especially in women, because it's also attached to childbirth and ovulation and all this other stuff, right? So you think about it from this perspective, what was supposed to happen as God had prescribed is if you're a virgin and your first partner is the person you married and had kids with, not only is there a bond, and some people will act like it's just for legal purposes or financial purposes, but no, it really is uh, part of the design of God, because as you bond together, there's a greater chance of not only that you will be faithful to each other, but also that your chemistry, that there's chemicals in your brain that makes you have a healthier mindset. So oxytocin acts as a chemical messenger, and I talked about these what it does: sexual arousal, recognition, trust, romantic attachment, and parent-infant bonding. The effects of Oxycontin on your brain are complex. Scientists are currently researching the role that they believe Oxycontin also plays a role in addiction, anorexia, anxiety, autism, spectrum disorder, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder. And so you think about even some of these people, whether it's a child or a young person that gets assaulted or abused in that way, how there's so many different mental issues and trauma and triggers that occur in them because this natural act of being intimate with someone is perverted and twisted, and so it affects their brain chemically. Um, and here's some other information. So, oxytocin is also called the love drug. Oxytocin is associated with trust, sexual arousal, relationship building, and that's why it's called the love hormone or the cuddle chemical. Oxytocin levels also increase when you're hugging someone and when you're experiencing an orgasm. Um, Oxytocin is essential hormone for childbirth and lactation, and it's rare to have abnormally high or low levels of oxytocin. And so even with a mother and your child, so when your mom holds the baby, it it helps them to bond even more. And dads, you need to hug your kids as well, but there's a special bond, and people have said this all the time, between a mother and their child, and that's true because of the fact that the mother not only holds the baby in her stomach, but once she takes the baby out, and if she breastfeeds or does something like that, she's the more nurturer. There's chemicals that's released that causes a special bond between that. The reason I brought all that up is if you think about this, and if you think about it in regards to the nuclear family or doing things God's way, what happens when the opposite occurs? So instead of a woman and her natural biology is to bond to her husband or bond to her sexual partner or bond to her baby, the father of her children, right? That creates such a cohesive bond. Instead of that, we are making women be unnatural, and promoting promiscuity or many sexual partners. And so it literally will affect the brain chemistry in a way that will cause things. It says here, stress, PTSD. A lot of times people walk around, call them angry black women. And part of it is because many of them may have experienced this chemical imbalance because of misguided affection. So now her whole biology was connected to that person she was with first, and you come along and you wonder why she's angry. It's not because she wants to be angry at times. It's because there's a chemical thing that's going on in her brain that her physiology is saying, that's not my partner. And so it's important to understand that how detrimental these things are when we begin to destroy the part of the culture of women being modest or having one, just having one sexual partner, or having the use of sex and how it's meant to be. Sex is meant for bonding purposes and for procreation purposes. And so that's why Romans chapter 1 says, when they did not acknowledge God, it says that they left the natural use for the opposite sex, right? They left the natural use because your nature and your biology actually determines these things as well. And so when we go against God's natural order, then that's why we have so much distress in the world. I think that's why we have so many people with mental problems. We have so many people that are just so messed up in their mind. And it's partially because that we have actually went against the designer, the creator's design, and it's causing us all kind of spiritual, emotional, and even biological disorders. And ultimately, what does the Bible say about that, especially when we're talking about hedonism? And so I want to read from you from a man who was very well versed with what hedonism brings. Because if we look at what is happening, you have to realize that and even here's the problem. I heard a person, a female online, telling young ladies, just be toxic while you're in your 20s. Go out and enjoy your life and do all that other stuff. Even young men, I'm not telling young men that you should do it as well. I'm saying that it'll affect women to a greater degree than men, because a woman's sexuality or sex intimacy is more connected to her emotions. Men as well, but not to the same degree, because of the chemistry, the biology in a woman that's meant for procreation and all this other stuff. So anyway, so they were telling these young ladies to go out and be toxic, go out and do whatever you're going to do. But the problem with that is that even though many of us had took that route, we tell the young men, go out and sow your wild oats. The problem with it is that once you get to a place where now you want to do things the right way, you have so much accumulated baggage that it makes it hard. It makes it difficult. And I believe that that's the reason why so many marriages fail, because we have had this idea that you should wait till you go out and enjoy life and sleep with as many people as you want to, or party, or do whatever you want to do. And then afterwards, after you've had your fill, then you come back and then you try to do things the right way. But that's the opposite of how things should be. Because think about this: if we all followed the creator's design and said, look, I'm not going to be intimate until I'm married and have my children with the person that I'm intimate with, then all these psychological and emotional and spiritual traumas and triggers and baggage, we wouldn't have it. We would have less of that. But the enemy has convinced us to do the opposite, which is why I believe that we have so much stress. Other countries aren't quite as bad. In some of these African nations, I have friends from Africa, and many of them were virgins when they got married. And it's part of their culture, right? It was part of our culture until we have allowed this cultural Marxism to come in and convince us that those things were bad, right? Back in the days, they had this song called "It's Your Thing, Do What You Want to Do. I Can't Tell You Who to Sock It To," right? It was this whole idea of going out and just living your life. And then at some point in time, you're going to be able to figure it out and get it together. But there was a gentleman who was well versed with this, and his name was Solomon. And many of you may be familiar with Solomon. The Bible says that Solomon was the richest man in the world. Not only was he the richest man in the world, but he also was one who was probably the most hedonistic person in the world, right? So it was reported that Solomon had 1,000 women, right? He had like 700 concubines and 300 wives or something like that, but 1,000 women. He had all the extravagance that the world had to offer, all the wealth and all the riches and all this other stuff. I was in Ethiopia earlier in this year, and the kings of Ethiopia are descendants of Solomon, and how that happened is Sheba, the queen of Sheba, heard about Solomon's magnificence, and she traveled all the way to see Solomon and his splendor and what he created and all this other stuff. And she fell in love with him and had baby with him, and that's what started the lineage, the real lineage of Ethiopia. But anyway, Solomon had it all, and Solomon gives us some insight as to what happens when we pursue these things. Ecclesiastes in chapter 2, I'm going to start reading in verse 1. It says, I said to myself, let's go for it. I'm reading from the Message translation. I said to myself, let's go for it. Experiment with pleasure. Have a good time. But there was nothing to it, nothing but smoke. What do I think of a fun-filled life? Insane, insane. My verdict of pursuit of happiness, who needs it? With the help of a bottle of wine and all the wisdom I could muster, I tried my level best to penetrate the absurdity of life. I wanted to get a handle on anything useful we mortals might do during the years we spend on this earth. He's saying, I wanted to pursue anything that you could do in life. I never said no to myself. This is what Solomon says. I never said no to myself. Oh, I did great things. I built houses, planted vineyards, designed gardens and parks, and planted a variety of fruit trees in them, made pools of water to irrigate the grove of trees. I brought slaves, male and female, who had children, giving me even more slaves. Then I acquired large herds of flocks, larger than any before me in Jerusalem. I piled up silver and gold, loot from kings and kingdoms. I gathered a chorus of singers to entertain me with song, and most exquisite of all pleasures, voluptuous maidens for my bed. Like I said, he had over 1,000 women at his disposal. Oh, how I prospered. I left all my predecessors in Jerusalem far behind, left them behind in the dust. What's more, I kept a clear head through it all. Everything I wanted, I took. I never said no to myself. I gave in to every impulse, held back nothing. I sucked the marrow of pleasure out of every task, my reward to myself for a hard day's work. Then I took a good look at everything I'd done, looked at all the sweat and hard work. But when I looked, I saw nothing but smoke, smoke and spitting into the wind. There was nothing to any of it, nothing. And then I took a hard look at what's smart and what's stupid, what's left to do after you've been king. That's a hard act to follow. You just do what you can and that's it. But I did see that it's even better to be smart than stupid, just as light is better than darkness. Even so, though the smart ones see where they're going and the stupid ones grope in the dark, they're all the same in the end. One fate for all, and that's it. And you know, at the end of Solomon's life and his writing, he said it's all vanity, it's all vain. And he said the only thing that really counts is knowing God and living a life that's worthy of being called a child of God. And I would say to you that all these things that we're seeing in the public is nothing new under the sun. It's the same old thing. The enemy, Satan, only repackages the same old thing over and over again. And when we keep falling for the same old things, it makes us as a society stupid. And so don't fall victim for it of these things. You know, the Roman Empire, which was one of the greatest empires in the world, on the planet, didn't get overtaken by enemies from without. It got destroyed from within because they pursued the same things that we're pursuing as a country. They pursued nothing but wealth and material gain, materialism, uh, physical pleasures, and it left the people so empty that eventually the nation fell apart from the inside. Um, and I would say to you as well that don't fall for the for the great deception that's out there. These young ladies, we need to pray for them. The ones that I mentioned, I'm not trying to throw them under the bus or try to really put them down. I'm just talking about the agenda, and I'm giving you a frame of reference so you know exactly what I'm talking about, because I believe that most of these young ladies are just victims of you know, they got caught up in this fame and fortune. They might have loved and wanted a career to be famous and to be a musician. And then somehow or another, they got caught up and now they're being used by the enemy for their agenda. There's a video out there, this one young lady I mentioned named Sukihana. And a couple of years ago, she did a video where she admitted that she sold herself to the devil and she was crying. And she says, I need to pray. Maybe God can save me. But she she admitted to it, because most of these people have done it, but very few of them will admit to it. But I do believe that as long as she's sincere, she can make her way back to God, because God is always there for us. We just have to ask him. And even as a society, although our society is really going downhill fast, I still believe that there is an opportunity for us to get it right. You know, there's a thing called revival that God can, at any point in time, he can change things. We just have to stand on the principles that he's put out there for us and desire for him to come and show up, and then things will be good. But anyway, this has been Joe Green, and thank you for listening. And please stay tuned for more videos to come. And also, if you get a chance, look back at some of my other videos. And I believe that there's a lot of information out there. I know I give you a lot of information, but I don't do it to try to bombard you or stimulate you with a whole lot of information. But I want you to understand that the concepts and the principles that I'm talking about are not things that I'm just making up, but these are well thought out agendas that have been around for a long time. And so we have to have our eyes wide open so that we don't fall victim to it. Until next time, peace and blessings to you. And may the Lord smile upon each and every one of you.